Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. We've got in our hands today Durin, and if you know anything about jobs in Genshin Impact, you'll know that Durin is apparently a dragon. And dragons happen to be, I would say, the third strongest type of job, Archons being the strongest and the second being chefs. Does Durin live up to our expectations as a dragon? We'll see how strong Durin is at Constellation 0 with various weapons and on 21 different teams. Apparently, Durin was born from M's pen. And I'm no dragon expert, but back in the year 2000, in Spyro, Year of the Dragon, Spyro taught us a valuable lesson in the indisputable fact that dragons do indeed come from eggs. So let's go ahead and check out his idols. And you can see here that a flower spawns. He grabs it, he looks happy, but poof, spontaneously combusts. That is quite sad indeed. Personally, I wonder how Durin has any clothes, or how he eats anything, or frankly, how he uses toilet paper to wipe. He's even got these dragon wings, which he uses to levitate. And personally, I'm super excited to see those dragon wings in action as we explore the overworld. I mean, check this out. He's even got his awesome wings with his normal attack and charge attack animation. He's clearly able to use them to glide a little bit. And he can even jump up super high into the air, as well as do that with his wings. So let's go ahead and try this out. We're gonna go ahead and use wings. And in terms of pre-farming for your pen, Durin Dragon Pen, here are the materials. Of course, he uses the fire gems plus this new boss, overworld boss material, plus these frost lamp flowers, and finally Fatui agent corpses. And unfortunately, Durin doesn't provide any exploration related buffs besides being that of a shonen male model, which means that they have a pretty decent B-hop and an above average dash animation. Honestly, a bit of a shame that he doesn't use his wings in any way for exploration purposes. A bit of a missed opportunity, kind of like Anefa's jetpack feat. Now, let's take a look at my Durin's build, with this first build having his signature weapon. And look at this beautiful crit rate. And his signature weapon, of course, provides a ton of crit rate, as well as some crit damage to his elemental burst damage. And finally, it increases his attack, as well as providing attack percent to the entire party. And if he possesses Hexarray Secret Right effects, what the heck is the Hexarray Secret Right effect? Basically, after you obtain the Little Witch's Dictionary and presumably complete some side quests, you'll develop a sudden fondness for brooms as you unlock Witchcraftery. These characters will now possess Hexarray, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, Secret Right, where having 2 or more of these Hexarray characters on the team will enhance various abilities for these characters. Then the blade will be enhanced by 75%, and I also showcase him with the Freedom Sword as well as the Finale of the Deep throughout the video. Of course, I'm always changing artifacts, especially when it comes to showing 21 different teams. For his artifact set, he's using the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fates with some pretty decent rolls. Of course, he's at Constellation 0 throughout the entire video, and his talents are at 10, 10, and 10. Now, admittingly, you really don't have to crown his basic attacks, but I did for one reason, which you'll see a bit further on in this video. Now, I do want to apologize for the less editing in this video. Unfortunately, with how version Luna 3 is, with 7 characters getting buffed, including Durin and Jehodaz's releases, I unfortunately just didn't have the endurance to really edit everything super well. So I do apologize in advance for that. But wait, please Durin unsubscribe because of one bad pun. During that time you were unsubscribing, you could have instead smashed that bell icon and liked the video instead. This video was filmed on the early access server and is not indicative of the final product. There may be some changes on release, so be sure to check the comments down below to see if there are any. Now let's go ahead and check out Durin's kit, starting with his basic attacks against our Regisfine friend. So, Durin's basic attacks are pretty unremarkable. Of course, they are physical basic attacks, and there you can see his charge attack where he does a cool flip. And unfortunately, he does not pyro infuse them himself in any way, at least not, you know, with his kit. So yeah, this is the part where I usually tell you guys his normal attacks basically deal negligible damage, but there is a situation where his normal attacks are pretty useful. Durin has two modes: Confirmation of Purity, or sometimes I'll refer to as White Durin, and Denial of Darkness, or Dark Durin. After using his elemental skill, now you can use a follow-up skill or normal attack. Pressing the elemental skill button will transmute him to the Confirmation of Purity form, and pressing the normal attack button will transmute him to the Denial of Darkness form. And also really quick, for this specific showcase, I've swapped him over to the Finale of the Deep. And let's go ahead and take a look at his kit in action a bit more properly. So this time, we're going to go ahead and use his elemental skill again, and then his elemental burst. And as you can see, now this AoE pyro attack is hitting the pyro Regisvine even while Durin is off field. And the first 10 hits do noticeably more damage, and then of course the damage goes down by a bit. So this time we're gonna do the same thing again, but check this out. You can notice each tick is doing 16,000. After triggering an overloaded, now it is doing 20,000 damage on hit, a very significant buff to its damage. While Durin is in Dragon of the White Flame, so basically, if you hit the enemy and cause a reaction, he will shred pyro resistance as well as the resistance of that corresponding element. So Overloaded will shred Electro, Pyro Swirl will shred Anemo, Pyro Crystallize will shred Geo, and of course, Dendro Burning will shred Dendro, and it shreds it by 20%. However, as you might have noticed, the damage went up by a lot more than just shredding 20%, and that is because while Hexarray Secret Rite is active, the Light of Manifestation, or that passive that I just showed you guys, is enhanced by 75%. So that means this goes from 20% resistance shred all the way up to 35% resistance shred against the Regisvine, thanks to Overloaded shredding both pyro and electro resistance. Without Hexarray buffs and with just 20% resistance shred, both pyro and electro damage will deal 16.6% more damage. And with two Hexarray characters on the team buffing that resistance shred to 35%, now both pyro and electro damage will deal 25% more. Needless to say, this of course works with Geo, Anemo, and Dendro as well. Now, what happens if Durin tries to deny the darkness, aka his other form, which, fun fact, is also indicated by a different icon. You can see the Denial of Darkness icon looking like this dragon claw thing, and the white Durin looking like this more holy looking symbol. Anyway, you may have noticed that white Durin does not shred Hydro and Cryo, and that is where Dark Durin comes into play, where you would probably use Dark Durin in those situations where the dominant auras are Hydro or Cryo on the enemy. So we're going to knock down the Regisvine and also give it a Hydro aura. And now you'll notice that his vaporizes are hitting for some pretty chunky numbers, 59,000 damage, able to very cleanly, I guess 3 shots, well 3 vapes, the Cryo Regisvine. And this is for multiple reasons. Dark form Durin gains this Dragon of Dark Decay buff, where his vaporized damage is increased by 40% and his melt damage is also increased by 40%. And the Hexarray Secret Rite buff, when he has 2 Hexarray characters in the party, buffs that by 75% all the way up to 70% bonus vaporized damage and melt damage. As we can see in this clip, without Hexarray, he's still doing a pretty chunky 49,659, but the Hexarray buff of an additional 30% vape damage definitely helps, where he's now dealing about 20% more damage with this specific setup. Now, another really interesting detail about his kit is that we can see here that his burst normally costs 70 energy, and that is a lot of energy. However, check this out, guys. By using his skill and hitting with the follow-up attack, either the light or the dark, he gains 33 flat energy, and he just completely filled up his burst just like that. Well, at least, you know, the remaining less than 33 energy. And this actually comes from leveling up his skill, where leveling up his skill increases the flat energy generated, which effectively makes his elemental burst cost just 37 energy. And scratch what I said about needing to hit the enemy with his elemental skill. As long as you are actively in combat, you don't have to hit the enemy to generate the flat energy. You can just use his elemental skill and then the follow-up skill or normal attack, and it will generate the energy regardless if it hit the enemy or not. And this passive here is a lot of yapping for saying it increases his burst's tick damage based on Durin's attack stat by up to 75%. Capping out at 75% at 2,500 attack on Durin. This increase applies to the first 10 ticks of his burst and is up to a 75% multiplier for Durin's burst damage for the first 10 ticks of his burst. To summarize, White Durin provides up to 5,443 burst damage, and his burst ticks up to 21 times per rotation. White Durin's burst ticks tick once every second, and they apply 1 gauge of pyro every other tick. White Durin also shreds Pyro, Electro, Dendro, Geo, and Animo resistance by 20 or 35% depending on whether or not he has a Hexarray buff, and the Pyro application has a bigger AoE than Dark Durin. Dark Durin, on the other hand, provides up to 5,797% burst multiplier, and there are up to 16 burst ticks. Dark Durin's burst ticks once every 1.25 seconds, and it applies 1 gauge of pyro every other hit. Finally, Dark Durin gains 40% or 70% vape and melt damage just for himself, depending on whether or not he has the Hexarray buff. Both forms of Durin, if they equip their signature weapon, will provide either 16 or 28% attack to the entire team, depending on whether or not he has the Hexarray buff, and both EEQ or ENQ or his rotation field time take about 3.1-ish seconds. And oh my god, guys, I almost forgot about the most important part of his kit. Hopefully your adrenaline doesn't surge too much because of this, but he gives you 25% more rewards when dispatched on a Mondstadt expedition. Okay, so I actually have a couple more bonus clips, with this first one being how Durin buffs Varissa's damage. And we can see here that with the 35% resistance shred as expected against a 10% resistance enemy, Varissa's mini burst did 25% more damage, and you slap in the additional signature weapon with Durin that gives 28% attack to Varissa, and now Varissa's doing about 36.6% more damage. Up next, I've got a quick weapon comparison for Durin's personal damage output. We've got the Favonius versus the Finale of the Deep versus his signature weapon, and unsurprisingly, his signature weapon is doing a lot better than the free-to-play option, the Finale of the Deep, of course. Though we are not able to heal the Bond of Life off of Durin, honestly, in a lot of teams, it is missing part of its buff, and of course, this doesn't factor in the particles that Favonius provides, as well as the team bonus attack buff that Durin's sword provides. And you know the drill with in-game tests like this, take them with a grain of salt, because the artifacts here are definitely not balanced well either. There we go, we finally made it to the team showcases, and we're going to start with White Durin showcases, and this is one of my favorite teams that we have for Durin. This is because we are bringing back our boy Razor. Never would I have thought that we'd have a usable Razor in 2025 before GTA 6, but here we are in Genshin Impact Luna 3. What a bizarre world to be in. And we have just a DPS Razor now. It is worth mentioning that Bennett, Chevreuse, and Razor are all at Constellation 6, and their constellations are actually quite important. But regardless, Durin here will of course shred both Pyro and Electro for this team, and Razor, well, with Bennett's Pyro infusion, he's able to just go ham here and just deal a lot of Pyro and Electro damage. And I mean, look at all these hits, including some overloadeds as well. Of course, Durin's off-field damage is nice too. Now, not the strongest team, of course, but still, like, this is just not something I was expecting to happen in version Luna 3. Next, we have Raiden Overloaded. Of course, pretty much any Electro DPS that can be on Overloaded, like Raiden, Varissa, Chloron, they can all be used with Chevreuse Durin Overloaded, and it all feels really good for these characters. Although Perhaps there's a bit more optimal team choice, like maybe Kujosara instead of Bennett or something. But yeah, I mean, I kind of forgot how much damage Constellation 0 Raiden does. But next we have the Pyro Reloaded, and just also FYI, most of the showcases after that Razor one are with signature weapons at Refinement 1. But here we have Pyro Reloaded with another 1.0 classic. We've got Klee. Let's go, Klee. Now, the thing about Klee, and I gotta be completely honest, I got no clue what to do for her combos right now. This is before I've done any research in terms of like how to use Klee or anything after the updates. So yeah, please, a part of my gameplay issues there. Now, next we've got Geo is kind of back, and what I like about Durin is that he is a fantastic off-field pyro applier for those crystallized shards, as well as to provide pyro resonance, which is good for Navia. And as we can see, Navia here can do some non-negligible damage with the Dorito dying before even her second shotgun shot. So because of course he shreds Geo resistance on the team, we can of course run him with Albedo as well as Arataki Ito for a what is this, 3 Geo team, I believe. We've got Chiori as well because she can benefit from the Geo shred. And look at this team go, so many orange numbers. And personally, I really like Durin on this team because he just actually provides some really solid benefits while allowing you to run both the buffed Albedo as well as, well, Chiori wasn't buffed, but you know, as well as Chiori. And next we have Burning because of course, Durin shreds Dendro on a burning team. You don't want to touch the grass because it burns, as we saw in his idle animation. But here we go. We've got Kanish going, doing the spin twin. And in this team, I don't even have it Bennett. So Kanish is also freed from circle impact, although that wasn't really the biggest issue for him. But yeah, finishing off the Dorito before, you know, all of his shots were necessary. Then we can even actually cram in both Ascendant Gleam as well as the Hexarray team buff with Flins and Ino, as well as Durin and Fisher. There are some, of course, other combinations that you might want to consider, but this is the one that I ended up testing. But we can see here, Flynn's doing absolutely cataclysmic amounts of damage. Well, a pretty decent amount of damage, single cycling it with this Durin team. And next we have the Durjin team, and I gotta be honest, I'm not 100% sure how good this team is, but it is pretty fun how you can now have an alternative to Toma for Burjin. And I actually believe White Durin to be better for this role than Toma because he's more energy friendly as well as shredding Dendro resistance by a bit more. But yeah, that's just my initial impressions, of course. So yeah, Durjin being a thing now. That was an elemental mastery build, by the way, on Durin, because yeah, of course. Next we have the aggravated burning load, which you should definitely see a physician if this is what you are experiencing. I mean, you know, who in their right mind uses Cyno these days in 2025? Definitely see a doctor for that. I'm just kidding, of course. But what is cool about this is that he will of course shred Dendro as well as Electro. If I'm correct, it's a little hard to tell what's going on, but you see overloadeds, you see burnings. That means hopefully everything is getting shredded, which is fantastic. And then we have, okay, yeah, you can of course just use Durin to apply Pyro too for a character like Milani. You can see here we're actually using 3 Hexarray characters, so that's fun to see. And we can see we're just relying on, this is Constellation 0 Mona, by the way. So with constellations on Mona, this team will be much, much better because Mona's constellations actually, oh, now they're pretty good. But yeah, we can see here, of course, easy-ish single cycle for Milani. We just use Durin to apply Pyro. Now, with Mavuika, admittingly, Durin is a bit iffy, but you can kind of squeeze him in like this. Mavuika, of course, is still just a fantastic DPS character, even in a raw Pyro situation. You can see my rotation there is definitely a bit scuffed, but we can go ahead and do the funny looking combo as well, just to deal a lot more raw Pyro damage output. So yeah, and 2 more quick showcases. We've got Pyro Applicator Durin for reverse melt. Now, I believe I used light Durin here, or white Durin, because of the faster Pyro application, even though, of course, he's not shredding anything meaningful here. Or he's not shredding, I guess he's shredding Sucrose's animo damage for what it's worth. But yeah, so the thing is that sometimes you want faster Pyro application, and this is one of those with a character like Risley, who performs a decent amount of reverse melts. Then we have another 4-star only team plus Durin, of course, so that means everyone's using 4-star weapons, and the other characters are 4-star characters. So here's a main DPS over Vape Durin. Personally, I'm not really sure how great this is, but at the very least, it's interesting, and it is a DPS option that you can do. You can utilize Bennett's Constellation 6 to give Durin that pyro infusion. Now we've made it to some of the Dark Durin showcases, and this first one is pretty odd, but I think it's really interesting. And honestly, I'm not 100% sure whether Dark Durin or Light Durin would be better for this. Perhaps even Light Durin in all honesty. But here we have basically version 1.2 team with Albedo and Mona helping to drive the Durin reactions. You can see 160,000 ticks from Durin, 40,000 ticks from Albedo. I cannot believe that this team appears to be usable. This is totally wacky. And then we have Dragon's team. We've got the original Hydro Dragon Uvalette. Then we've got Durin, who is a baby dragon, I guess, a dragon pen, and a Nefa, who is a dragon lord. Although I don't think she's like technically a dragon, but it's dragon lords in the name, right? So yeah, close enough. And here we go. Rotation probably completely scuffed. Gonna be completely honest. I wish I had more time to try out all these teams, but oh my god, so many different teams. I'd rather just give you guys some demonstrations of viability over perfectly optimized rotations and stuff. So next we have Vape DPS Dark Durin. This one actually kind of surprised me, but of course you do have to rely on Bennett's Pyro Infusion. We can see here that every once in a while the charge attack will vape, dealing some pretty decent damage. Able to single cycle with signature weapons, which is actually not terrible. Then we have Melt Durin. Melt Durin, of course, much more difficult to pull off because Melt is, eats up 2 cryo gauges versus Vape eating up only half. And we can see here that, we're doing some decent damage. Look, 420k. If Durin attacks, we're going to apply Pyro. So we just literally stood there in order to deal with the melts. Now, another perhaps more viable option is to have an on-field cryo. Although the damage is much lower because Bennett is just so good. If you can on-field Durin into Bennett's burst, that is just infinitely better. But, perhaps maybe Citlali wasn't the best choice here for this. But yeah, you can just kind of on-field the cryo to make sure cryo ores on them, maybe deal a little bit of cryo DPS and then melt that damage. So some pretty silly showcases, all things considered. And Durin and DPS Venti versus Dire Stygian Onslaught. You heard that right. We've got a DPS Venti in the house running 4-piece Viridis Inventor. Honestly, I'm not sure what to run, and probably not the 4-piece Viridis Inventor. But yeah, I just slapped that on him because, building artifacts and stuff on the Creator Experience server, which this video, of course, is recorded on, can definitely be a pain in the you-know-what. But we've got these builds for these characters, mostly a C0R1 team. Venti's not even crowned, and I don't think Faruzan's crown matters that much, but it helps a little bit. So Faruzan's also not crowned, and neither is Bennett. Yeah, he's not crowned either. So this team going in here has a decent amount of room to improve, and as well as the artifact quality can definitely improve. But here we can see that this thing actually fills up your energy. So Venti can just pull it down, and what is this team? And then you break through its cryo shield. Oh my god, this is just beyond wacky. And now we're on fielding Venti. Let's go. Look at those damage numbers. This is so strange to me. I love it. I absolutely love that Venti is getting a renaissance here. Able to kind of deal with one of the dire, difficulties in Stygian Onslaught. Of course, this fight was very, very specifically designed for Venti. There's no other way to put it, right? This isn't going to be the most insane team ever, but the fact that this team can complete anything on Dire just demonstrates how Hoyoverse is putting an effort into making older characters like Venti feel much better to use and much more reasonable to use, and as a DPS character as well. So of course my plan is to try and make a video on each of these characters that are getting buffed. Venti, of course, getting very significant, very major buffs. But yeah, we can see now that Venti also is able to drag this thing down by a little bit, and his ranged attacks also help a ton. And unfortunately, this run, I'm actually surprised this run completed it because I missed the Pyro Infusion on Venti's burst, which of course absolutely obliterates this thing's shield, which just goes to demonstrate, hey, even with a lot of mistakes in the gameplay, we're still able to complete this on Dire. Anyway, when Venti uses his burst, when he has the Hexa Circle, Hexa Ray buff, I think, actually, not 100% sure which parts of his kit require the Hexa Ray buff or not, but at the very least, it definitely helps him out. Now Venti has some Pyro Infusion as well as some Elemental Burst extension time, giving him roughly 10 seconds of uptime on his Anemo Infusion. Absolutely wacky. You love to see it. Personally, I'm so happy that this is a viable team now. And I've got one more bonus run for you guys, that being a Varissa overloaded team versus Dire. I figured I'd showcase another one of Durin's probably better teams with a strong DPS character like Varissa. Similar setup to the previous team, except Varissa's artifacts here are a bit worse than, for example, Vent. And oh my god, I realized that the crit ratio is atrocious. I should have swapped him over to a crit rate circlet, but I guess I wasn't paying attention. Actually, I recorded the builds after I did the runs and totally forgot to switch up his artifacts. So a bit awkward there, but hey, not the biggest deal in the world. Anyway, we've got this rotation here, which is really cool because we're able to build up Durin's burst at minimal, like additional battery funneling time, thanks to all the flat energy and the energy from Chevreuse. And this team feels great because Varissa naturally runs on 18-second rotations. So does Eon-san. I think Chevreuse is a bit more flexible, but Durin also runs on an 18-second rotation. He has the option to extend the rotation to about 20 seconds, but Durin, with his cooldown, burst cooldown being 18 seconds, means that ideally he's in an 18-second rotation team. And Varissa happens to be an 18-second rotation character, so this team feels quite fantastic, all things considered. And we can see here Varissa doing some absolutely colossal plunge damage numbers. This thing provides a 600% attack buff when it's like in its weird gravitational phase. So not right now, but you guys will see the 500,000 plunges here and there when that buff is active. But basically you have to jump up into the air, reach a certain height, and then you will get that attack buff. So here we go. Now it will give us that attack buff now that this gravity field has increased. You can see, bam, 580,000 damage. And sometimes the follow-up mini burst from Varissa doesn't trigger that. But yeah, as you can see, Durin basically providing that off-field pyro application for Varissa is fantastic for maintaining that overloaded uptime. And in this team, actually, Durin's not even being ran as a, a Hexa Ray teammate. So in other words, he's not getting the 35% of resistance shred buff, but even then I feel like he's still very, very usable for this team. Is Mavuika a bit better for this team? Probably, but you know, this can allow your Mavuika to go do something better with her life, like for example being a melt DPS character, and have Durin pick up that role. So yeah, fantastic clears by Durin. So let's talk about my opinions on Durin. As you can see, he is a very versatile character. You can just pair him up with any Hexa Ray character for more buffing or more vape/melt damage for himself. And for most characters that have been released up to this point, there's an obvious like best team for that character. And for Durin, it just doesn't feel that way at all, because like just see how many teams I've used in this video, and frankly there are so many more that I've not even touched upon. And I do think that Durin doesn't feel like a big buff for already meta characters, but instead I would describe him as a great partner / really strong alternative to some of their potential currently like best teammates or great teammates. However, Durin is a big buff for example, the Hexa Ray characters, the 7 Hexa Ray characters, because when you pair Durin with them, their power level definitely goes up, not just because of the Hexa Ray buffs, but because Durin's a fantastic character, and also their team options greatly improve and expand. So if you like any of the current 7 Hexa Ray characters that were buffed, then yeah, Durin will be a fantastic pickup for you. However, Durin also doesn't feel absolutely necessary for those Hexa Ray characters. You can definitely just like use Razor with Fischl on an overloaded team, or you can use Klee with Albedo. etc, etc. Durin is far from mandatory, but Durin definitely feels like one of the best / better characters for those Hexarray characters. And another really cool thing about Durin is that his focus not only will, buffs like underutilized characters like the Hexarray characters, but he's effectively a buff towards less synergistic reactions with pyro, like for example pyro crystallize, or burning, or a swirl, or overloaded. Like, these reactions aren't nearly as popular, I would say, as for example vaporize and melt. Not only that, but shredding these elements feels really great with Durin, because for example, if you have pyro on the enemy and you swirl it, you don't even have to like swirl it with a character equipping the Viridescent Veneer, but just literally any Anemo character triggering swirl will shred pyro and Anemo. Like for example, if Xiao as a DPS character triggers swirl, you're going to get the Anemo shred and you're going to get the pyro shred. This of course applies to Geo, overloaded, as well as Dendro and burning. So yeah, the way that the resistance shred works on Durin feels fantastic. And I also don't really like to focus too much on future impact, but it seems like characters like, for example, Varka and potentially Alice and Nicole may belong to the Hexarray faction. Please correct me if I'm wrong, my lore experts down in the comments below. But as always, I don't recommend like polling based on future impact, but it is definitely something worth considering when it comes to Durin. And needless to say, Durin is also very usable on teams with overwhelming hydro or cryo auras because of his personal vape and melt damage. Although of course, in my opinion, the resistance shred is a bit more valuable since Durin is more of a sub DPS character. He can still be used to deal a decent amount of damage himself in his Dark Durin form. Finally, there are plenty of teams, as I mentioned, that were not showcased, like spread DPS characters, Linny, Arlecchino, Clorond, Wander, Xiao, you name it, there's probably a team for that character plus Durin, because that is just how insanely flexible he is. So yeah, I think Durin is a character that is done right in terms of his gameplay design. Him being an elevator for so many characters is, in my opinion, absolutely fantastic. And him also being a Hexarray and the whole Hexarray system, in my opinion, is also great as well. Let me know what you think about Durin down in the comments below. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose, signing out.